There it is. Is that better? We had a program, a software program, when I was preaching in Iowa, and I could put in everyone's phone number in the entire congregation. And then several times a week when an emergency would come up, that everyone needs to pay. Someone's admitted to the hospital, someone had a baby, someone died, whatever. Then I could plug in that program, pick up the phone, and I could put a message on it. Well, they called that program, that computer program, Big Mouth. It finally got to where every time I would call, and I'd hang the phone up, and it would call every person in there. It would call them several times until there was an answer. And the children sometimes would answer the phone, "Mama, it's Big Mouth." So I kind of wish they had named that program something a little different than Big Mouth. But the shoe fits, as the Texan says, wore it. And so I wore it. It's good to be here. It's good to see an auditorium full of people that love the Lord. This is beautiful. In a building that God has given you, assemble in, you are a blessed people. And you are a blessed people, in my opinion, to have Matthew and Tracy working with you. What a blessing. What a great couple they are. And yes, Matthew, I remember saying that because God can use area managers, but not Matthew. Go get somebody else, Lord. Matthew needs to be here, and he needs to be preaching. This morning, I want us to talk about encouraging each other in evangelism. I mean, you got a facility here that God has given you, and there's a few empty seats that need to be full. And God is not going to just bring them here. He's going to use the talents, as we've talked about in our men's class just earlier. He's going to use us in every way to get them here, to get people here filling up these empty seats. And so what we have to realize is our whole purpose in life is to reach another soul. I kind of liken it sometimes, Matt, whenever you're preaching a lot on evangelism. Occasionally, this happened to me in the past, I'll overhear someone say, evangelism, that's all that man preaches. I'm sick and you're sick and tired, I am sick and tired of hearing lessons on evangelism. Saving souls. That's all Matt talks about. And I said, suppose you're down at the local hospital. You have a hospital here in Ripon, I'm sure. And you're walking, oh, you don't? Well, I hope you got one here close, because I may need it. You're walking down the halls of the hospital, and you hear doctors and nurses, and all they're saying, saving lives, saving lives, saving lives. And you'd say, you bet, that's what they got this hospital here for. I like to hear that in the hospital because that's what they're about, saving lives. But I don't like to hear it at church. What? Brethren, that's what we're about. That's the only thing. Why did we live past the baptistry? That's when we were saved, wasn't it? When we were buried into his death and raised to walk a different life, all of a sudden we're in a saved condition, and you can't get any saveder than that. Why didn't the Lord just take me on to heaven right then? I was pure. I was sinless. I hadn't made any mistakes. I didn't even get out of the water yet. Why didn't he just take me on? Only one reason. Only one reason. He said, Bill, now, you go teach somebody what you know. And as Matt said, that was actually 59 years ago. I learned that lesson, I guess, very well. I grew up outside the church. I didn't grow up like many of you did, having parents that always had me in the assembly. I can remember going to church one time with my mother and dad, and I loved my mother and dad, don't get me wrong, and I was scared to death. I'd never been in that bunch of people before. I didn't want to be here. And I sat on my mother's lap. I was probably 6 or 8 years old. I was about as tall as she was, but I was sitting on her lap, scared. And that's the only time I really remember being inside of a church building until I got to be a teenager. And then I met a pretty little 15-year-old girl. You think she's pretty now? Oh, I do too. She is beautiful. But 15 years old? Oh, she was the prettiest thing I ever saw in my life. A year later, I finally persuaded her to marry me. Oh, yeah, we were kids. We were teenagers when we got married. And I obeyed the gospel about a month before we were married. And I thought at that time, I am the luckiest, and I don't believe in luck, I am the luckiest man in the world. Not only do I have salvation, but I've got the most beautiful woman God ever gave a man. Lord, what do you want me to do? You name it. You name it, I'll do it. You tell me which direction, and I'll go. I can do anything. I think you got a verse. Philippians chapter 4, verse 13. And you know what Paul said just shortly before that in verse 11 and 12? Paul says, I have been in about every circumstance you can think of. I've been hungry and I've been satisfied. But he says in verse 12, and this is the American Standard Version, the one Paul used, and I still use it. Oh, you don't believe that? He says, I have learned, and I have that word underlined in my Bible. I have learned the secret. That's in the American Standard. I have learned the secret to be content. Learned. That meant I went to school. I had trials. I had temptations. I had difficulties. I fell down several times. And I learned, just like Paul did. And you say, I learned the secret that in whatever situation God has given me, I can do it, because verse 13 then he says what? I can do all things. Not some. I can do all the things that God has given me. But what does that entail in order to be a soul winner? In order for me to be evangelistic minded, what must I do? Many times, I have to get out of where I'm comfortable. Matt, and I keep using you, brother, because you volunteered here and they accepted you. Matt got out of his comfort zone of being a realtor and going to be a plant manager or district manager or whatever they're going to give you. Got out of his comfort zone and came to a school that was probably the most difficult school you've ever attended in your life. It was mine. Oh, man. It wasn't comfortable a lot of nights that Matt would be setting up at midnight or 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning studying for that class the next day. He did that. I know he did because I did it. And he's not any smarter than I am. We have to get out of where we're comfortable. In fact, it's my understanding that we never grow until we get out of our faith comfort zone. I've got to get out there where the rubber meets the road. I've got to get out there. Because when I get out there and I don't feel like I'm capable, guess who I'm depending on? Guess what I have done since 5:30 this morning? I have prayed and asked God to please help Pam and I as we teach these wonderful people, as we share our thoughts with this great congregation in Ripon, California. I don't know how many times, whenever Paul says pray without ceasing, that's what I've been doing all morning. And I hope you have been too. Because I can't do this by myself. I've got to have God's help in order to have my thoughts put together, in order to have my words come out correctly, and I want them to be right for you. Are there any other people in the past, in the Old Testament, for example, that had to get out of their comfort zone? Well, probably a few that we can name. One that I like to talk about is old Noah. Now, here's Noah, got 3 sons. They're married. He's got a wife. Her name is Mrs. Noah. And what it is, you knew that. And here God comes along and says, I want you to build me a boat because it's going to start raining one of these days. It's going to start what? You see, it never rained. Moisture had come up from the earth to water the plants. It had never fallen out of the sky. And so he starts telling the people in the community, you better repent. I know that 2 Peter tells us that. He was a preacher of righteousness. And so God says, I want you to build this big boat. And Ben, it's a little bigger than your fishing boat. Where's Ben? It's quite a bit bigger than your fishing boat. It's about 3 football fields long. And I know some of you may have been to Kentucky to see the ark. Oh, man. We've got one couple back here. It's amazing, isn't it? It is. You cannot imagine the size of that thing that Noah and his family built. But can you imagine Noah's argument? I know that Moses said, blah, 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 blah. I've forgotten the language, God. I can't go. And so what would what would Noah say whenever God said, I want you to build me this size boat, and here are the dimensions. And he would have bought out the lumber yard. No, wait a minute, there wasn't a lumber yard. He's going to have to cut down the trees, hew up the timber, haul it to where he is going to build this little boat, and people are going to come by. And what are they going to say? What are you doing, Noah? Well, I'm building a boat. A boat? What for? It's going to rain. Going to what? Water is going to fall from the sky. Yeah, right. Can you imagine what they called that poor man? Was he out of his comfort zone? Oh, man. That had never happened ever. In fact, sometimes we see that in the business meeting. Well, we can't do that because we've never done that before. Or we did do it back several years ago, but it didn't work. Sometimes we got to get out of our comfort zone and get the job done. And let's look at Abraham. Poor Abraham records some of his problems, doesn't it? He had a hard time explaining Sarah to Abimelech, to Pharaoh, and to everybody else that came along, because evidently she was gorgeous. And said, Abraham, I want you to leave where you grew up, leave your family, and go to a land I'm going to show you. Okay. Yeah, we would do that, wouldn't we? I want you to leave California and come to Denver. What? But this is where my job is. This is where my family lives. But he told Abraham, come on, I want you to leave. What did he do? He took Sarah, he took Lot, he took his servants. Well, he kind of obeyed. He said, take your family and leave. Well, let me take a few other people with me. And he did, and God blessed him because of that. But can you imagine whenever he was rolling up the tent, loading it on some of the donkeys or whatever he hauled them with? Where are you going, Abraham? I don't know. Somewhere. God told me he's going to lead me. Can you imagine how uncomfortable that was? Oh, but let's use another example. A man that came to this earth from another sphere, another dimension. We call him Jesus, or we call him Jesus. He came from the spiritual realm. You remember in Philippians chapter 2, I love teaching Philippians. That is the most beautiful book in the Bible. But in chapter 2, it says, if there is any exhortation, if there is any consolation, if there's any love of Christ, if there's any ministration of the Spirit, if there's anything that we can do, Paul says, make full my joy, that you have the same mind, that you have the same spirit, that you think alike, that you offer yourselves before everybody else. In fact, verse 3 and 4 tells us that. He says, I want you to always have your thoughts on someone else. Well, I kind of like to think about Bill. I don't know about you. I like to think about my... Now, God's not against comfort. I don't think at all. You're comfortable sitting there in those padded pews. I have actually preached to people sitting on the ground. I taught in Tanzania, Africa. And I taught for 6 hours a day to 37 students sitting on wood benches. They took notes of everything I said, because what I was saying was the only commentary they had. And it was 100 degrees every day. They got out of their comfort zone in order to come and listen to an old boy from Arkansas talk 6 hours a day to them for 2 weeks. Correction, for 1 full week. 6 hours a day. Wow. These men were dedicated. In fact, they gave me a bed in a house. They slept on the concrete floor. They were awake at daylight, so was I, because I could hear them praying. They were bowed all the way over to their head was on the floor, and they were praying to God for probably 30, 45 minutes, maybe an hour. God, please use us. God, please thank you for all of the wonderful blessings you have given us. And I'm looking around at this empty house. The only thing is there is a table and a couple of chairs. That's it. And a little mat on the floor that they were sleeping on. They ate fufu. You've probably eaten fufu. No, you probably haven't. I have. Fufu, it comes from the root of a cassava tree. It's ground up into a powder. A little bit of water is added to it until it's a paste, and you can make a ball out of it and play pitch. And they would dip it in a little bit of sauce. Delicious. And if you didn't dip it in sauce, it tastes like bread dough. No taste to it at all. But they got out of their comfort zone in their home, which wasn't comfortable in me at all, and came and slept on a concrete floor in order to get to hear what I had to say. You're talking about humbling you. That humbles you when people will do that for you. Then what am I able to do? What am I willing to do? I'm willing to take care of the 100-degree temperature every day. I'm willing to eat fufu. I'm willing to do whatever it takes in order to be there for these men and for these women. Jesus was the same way. In fact, it goes on to say in the book of Philippians chapter 2, verse 5, then it says, I want you to have this mind in you that was also in Christ Jesus, who existed in the very form of deity. But he gave up that deity. He emptied himself and became a slave. It's the word doulos there in the Greek, which means slave. It says servant, usually in most of our English texts. But he gave up heaven. He says, I had rather be there on earth And I had rather sacrifice my life. I had rather be beaten, a crown of thorn put on my head. I had rather do everything in the world than be here in heaven. So I'm going down there because I'd rather be on earth than in heaven. I know he said that because that's exactly what he did. Did he get out of a comfort zone? Oh, man. We can't even imagine, dream of that comfort zone that Jesus came from. But am I willing to get out of my comfort zone? Will I, if he suffered for my redemption, will I suffer for his glorification? Amen. Be glad and honored to. Colossians chapter 1 and verse 24 says, I fill up on my part, Paul says, that which was lacking in the afflictions of Jesus in my flesh for his body's sake. I fill up on my part. So what comfort zone possibly have I been in and am right now that I'm willing to step out from being comfortable? We talked about in men's class this morning. When I'm asked to do something, I will always say yes. Where's Brian? He's gonna be asking guys. Yeah, here he is right back here. He's going to be asking people because every man in that class said, anything Brian asked me to do, I'll do it. I'll never say no. Isn't that what they said, Brian? Am I right? I am willing to teach that class. I am willing, even three young men sitting here on the second row, I said, if you were asked to preach next Sunday night, would you? And all three of them finally said, yeah, I will. Because we cannot say no. We have to get out of our comfort zone in order to be the evangelist, in order to be the speaker, in order to be the personal evangelist and the winner of souls that we want to be. I want to ask you to do anything I'm not willing to do. I can't do that. And Jesus Christ said the same thing. I will not ask you to do anything that I am not willing to do. Let me close with one passage. Hebrews chapter 12. I love the book of Hebrews. Again, it's one of my favorite books. Whatever book I'm using is my favorite book. But all the way through, you know, the main word in the whole book of Hebrews, we can either say it's the word superior or better, whatever word you want to use, because everything in it, the Hebrew writer is trying to tell us, is better. It is so much better. Jesus is better. His sacrifice is better. His tabernacle is better. Everything Jesus has is better. And so he gets to chapter 12 after he has talked in chapter 11 about the Old Testament worthies. You know, all of them did that by faith. And he gets to chapter 12 and he says, seeing that we're encompassed about, because he's using chapter 11, seeing that we're encompassed about by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us hold fast our confession, firm until the end. Looking, verse 2, into Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who, listen to this one, who for the joy set before him suffered the cross, endured the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the Father on high. Let's go back to that first phrase. He enjoyed the suffering. Now, wait a minute. Was he an ascetic? You know what asceticism is? Asceticism is someone that beats their head against the wall to show how righteous they are. It shows how stupid you are. that punishment will make me more righteous. No, that's not what he's talking about. For the joy set before him. Why did he look at the cross as joyous? Why did the writer say, for the joy set before him? Because Jesus saw the outcome of his suffering. You ever watch the movie Pay It Forward? That happened, 20 years ago, something like that. A little boy was assigned in a class at school to come up with some project, and all the kids were rustling around trying to think of something. And this one little boy, I don't know what I'll do. I'll just go start doing some great good things to people, perfect strangers, people I don't even know. And they would tell him, well, what do I owe you? You don't owe me nothing. Just pay it forward. Go do it to somebody else. And it got to be catching. It got to be a phrase, which, yeah, that was wonderful. I thought it was a wonderful movie. What do we do? In fact, that's exactly what Jesus said. I see what my suffering is going to accomplish. I see it's going to save your soul. I see it's going to forgive your sins. I see it's going to bring you to heaven. Oh, wow. Now, I don't think he went to the cross laughing and with a big smile on his face. But Jesus, being God, could see the outcome of what he was doing. We need to pay it forward, folks. We need to see by going and knocking on that door, going and asking that person for a Bible study, even though I am so nervous, even though I'm so afraid, they're going to say no. Well, if they say no, they say no. My nephew, who's 8 years younger than I am, we grew up together as brothers. I was his older brother. He was my younger brother. Still is. I preached a lesson like this in Wynne, Arkansas, 25 years ago, probably. He was sitting, and he was one of the elders. He was sitting in the congregation, and he was sitting by his son and his girlfriend that was not a member of the church. And I talked about stepping out of your comfort zone and asking people for Bible studies and doing what we know we should be doing. And he said, that hit me, Uncle. That was right between my eyes. He said, I couldn't keep a straight face. And I thought, I have not ever talked to Whitney. And she's going to marry my son. I have never talked to her about her soul. If God gives me life when this lesson is over, I will talk to her standing right here. He made that commitment to God, and he tells me this later with tears in his eyes. He said, Uncle, when you finished that lesson and we had closing prayer, he said, I turned to Whitney and I said, Whitney, have you thought about becoming a Christian? She said, yes, and I want to right now. And she started crying. She was baptized that night. She's faithful today, 25 so years later. Stewart, my nephew, stepped out of his comfort zone. He said, my heart was beating so fast. I was afraid she would say no and leave. I was afraid she'd break up with my son because she was a sweet girl and still is precious, precious girl. Because we get out of our comfort zone, we can reach, no telling, the masses of people right here in Ripon, California. Please consider today if there's something that you haven't done because that'd make me uncomfortable. Say, I'm looking for things that make me uncomfortable because that's when I grow for him. If you feel that way and you need to respond, come as we sing together.